Hey everyone, in today's video, I'll be showing you how to integrate Stripe checkout into a Django app. So right now I have this simple page set up and I also have a thank you page, and we'll be using these two things. For the app, I have my Stripe account. So you have to have a Stripe account. I have the test account working right now. And then I have the documentation up for Stripe on how to integrate checkout. So they actually have an example with Django. So I'll be using a lot of that code and I'll be explaining it as I go along. So most of the code will be the same, but I'll do something slightly different so you can see how I would integrate it into my app. And then finally, you need to have the Stripe CLI. So this will allow us to test webhooks, which I'll do towards the end of the video. And the Stripe CLI is the only way to do that locally. So to get started, the first thing I need to do is set up Stripe in pip. So I'll go back to my app and the files are just, views and the templates that I just showed you. So pip install Stripe. And once I do this, what I want to do is I want to bring in the configuration values for Stripe. So I have tokens. So I'll go to my settings file and at the bottom, I'll add the tokens that I'm going to get from my test dashboard. So I'll go to developers, I believe, and then API keys. And then I have a publishable key and a secret key. So I'll just copy this and I'll say something like Stripe public key. And I'll just copy the public key that I have. And then I'll do the same thing for the private keys. So Stripe private key. And I'll copy these. And of course, in a real situation, you probably wouldn't want to hard code the tokens right here. Instead, you can import them from environment variables or some other source that's not, saved in your source control. So the tokens can stay private. But for example purposes, I'm just putting them here. So once I have this, let's take a look at the documentation to kind of see the process that I have to follow. So I set up Stripe already. That's step one. The next step is to create a product and prices. So before you can have a checkout process, you have to have the ID of a product and a price for that product that the user is going to pay. So to do that, you can set that up on the dashboard here. And to do it, you go to products here on the left-hand side and you can add a product. And I'll call this product the Django product. And then you can add pricing to it. So here I have standard pricing, I have package pricing, graduated pricing, volume pricing. Doesn't really matter in my case. I'll just keep it standard. And I'll also make this a one-time payment. And I'll make the price of this $99. So the Django product will be $99. In addition to the name of the description, let's say the best product ever. You can upload an image. I don't have any images for this product, so I'll just leave that blank. And there are some other options, but just generally, you need a name for the product and a price, and then you can save the product here in the upper right-hand corner. So I'll save that. And then we just need to keep track of this price ID down here. So with the product, we get a product ID and a price ID. We don't really care about the product ID for this example. We only care about the price ID. So we'll be coming back and we'll be using this somewhere, but just take note that we have to use this price ID eventually. So let's go back to the documentation. And we've created our product and price. So now we have to create a checkout session. So they say this is server side. So the idea behind the checkout session is on your server, what you'll do is you'll start a session that represents the things that the user is going to buy. And of course, it uses your credentials to start the session. But beyond that, you have to have the things that the user is going to buy. So in our case, we only have one product. But imagine you had like a shopping cart or something, and you had 10 things. What you'll do is you'll put the 10 things in this session when you create it. So when they get redirected to the checkout page, it will have all those things listed and they can pay the appropriate price. So what I'll do is I'll copy this code for create a checkout session and I'll put it in my app. And where I'm going to put this is in the views. So I'll go to my views inside of my actual example app and I'll just put this up here. So let me just format this a little better because it didn't copy correctly. And then this is what we need. Okay, so we have the Stripe API key here. So SK test, that's not the one that we want. Instead, we want the private key here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import from Django.cnf. I'm going to import settings. And then I can say the Stripe API key equals settings dots and then Stripe private key, right? So now if I run my app just to make sure that loaded correctly, it should be okay. Then what I want to do is I want to put that price ID that I was just telling you about in the price field here. So I'll go back to the dashboard and I'll just copy that price ID and I'll put it here. I can select. So we have the price ID for the product. And then we need to have a success URL and a cancel URL. So for my purposes, I'll make the cancel URL the same as the buy page just to keep it simple, because the cancel page doesn't do anything. It's just where the user gets sent if they choose not to go through with the process. And then the success URL is where they get directed if things are successful. So this is what I want to create here. So first, I'll modify this. So I'll build a URL for this. And I need to import reverse. So from Django.urls, import reverse. And what I'll do here for the cancel URL is I'm going to say reverse and then thanks, because that's my thank you page. Let me just go to my URLs to make sure I have the name. Yeah, so name is thanks for the thank you page. And I want to build an absolute URL because this is going to be sent to Stripe. So I'll do requests dot build absolute URI, and then I can pass in that reverse here. Okay, so I'll do something similar for this link above. So requests dot build absolute URI, and I just did this backwards. So this should be index, and the one above is going to be thanks. So build absolute URI, and then I'll pass in reverse. And I want thanks. And because of this placeholder that Stripe has in here, it probably won't play well with the reverse here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of concatenate it. So if I take off everything before the question mark and then just add it here, it should maintain this checkout session ID, because this is a variable for Stripe. So when I try to pass this through Django, it might escape the curly brackets, and that's not what I want. I want them to stay there because I'm sending this to Stripe. So this should build my absolute URI for thanks. Then I'm appending this question mark session ID, checkout session ID for the query string. So now that we have this set up, everything with Stripe, and by the way, this is only going to accept card payments, so that's why card is here. You can have other methods of payment in Stripe, but card is the one that everyone is familiar with, so I'll just leave that there. So now that we have the session that was created, so we have the idea that something is going to be purchased by the user, we need to then send this information over to the template so I can redirect the user to the checkout page when they click on the button. So I'll create the context dictionary. And in it, I'll have the session ID. So I can just take session.id, this object that's created here from session.create. And then I'll also pass in the Stripe public key. So say Stripe public key. So when you have something on the front end, you'll have the public key instead of the private key. So this should be settings.stripe public key, and we'll need that momentarily. So now let's go over to the template. So templates index. And what I'll do is I'll bring in the code that they have and I'll show you how it gets used. So let me go over to the documentation and we see the redirect to checkout. So the first thing that they tell us to do is import the script. So I'm using plain HTML here. If you're using something like React, the process is a little different, as you can see here. But with plain HTML, we can just take the script tags and place them in our code. I'll just place them at the bottom after the buy now code. And then I also need this code here that will redirect to checkout. So let me copy this and I'll paste it in a script. So let me create the script tags and close out the script here and just format this a little bit better. So let's see, this all needs to be indented there. That looks good. So now I have the code for importing Stripe and then redirecting to checkout. And of course, I need the session ID here. So this comes from the template. So I can actually keep the brackets here because this is the same in the template language. And what I want to use is the session ID. So session_ID right here. And I need to maintain the quotes because I'm taking the session ID and I'm putting it into JavaScript. So it's kind of bypassing the HTML and going into JavaScript. So I still need the quotes because the quotes need to be around the session ID, which will just be a string without the quotes. So now that I have this, I have to worry about putting an event handler on the button. So anytime the user clicks on the button, they'll be redirected to checkout, which is what this function here does. So inside the script, what I'll do is I'll get the button. So we'll say buy now button. Buy now button equals document query selector. And I want to select the button. So I have an ID here, buy now button. So I need the hash and then buy now button. And then from there, I can add a click event. So a button or buy now button, add event listener. And I'm listening for click. So not event, I'm listening for click. And then what I want to do is create the function body here. And inside the function body, I can put this. So actually, I'll just move this down and then indent everything here. So now this code will only get executed after the user clicks on the button. Right? So now let's go through the process and see if everything is working correctly. And I feel like I'm forgetting the Stripe key. So let me see where that gets added. Yeah, so I forgot this part here. So we have to take that public key that I put in the context and we have to put it in the code here. So I'll put this above, and this is going to be the Stripe public key. What did I name this? Yeah, Stripe public key. Just like that. And for the same reason, it needs to go into quotes as the session ID. So let's try this and see if it works. Hopefully there are no errors. I'll refresh the page. And we see Stripe is not defined. That's pretty easy to handle because I forgot to import Stripe. So import Stripe. Now let's go back and refresh. Okay, so we have the page. And then I'll hit buy now. And nothing happens. So let's take a look at the console. So it says, please call Stripe with your publishable key. Use an empty string. So it looks like the settings aren't loading properly. And let me make sure my settings are saved and they're printing. So I'll go here and I'll just print out the public key to see if it's there. So let me refresh the home page and then I printed it and we see the public key is there. So maybe it's not being imported in the template. So what I can do is I can go to the view source and I see there's nothing there for the public key or the session ID. So somewhere I didn't add those in correctly. So let's go. We have Stripe public key. Oh, this is a pretty easy thing to fix. I forgot to pass the context to the render function. So context like that. And now if I refresh the page, okay, we don't see any errors. So buy now. I clicked it. So now I've been redirected to the checkout page. And if I look at the URL, I'm on Stripe now instead of my app. So now I'll just put in some information. So testuser@gmail.com. The card information for the tests account is just 42 over and over again. So 42, 42, 42, 42. Put an expiration date in the future, any CVC, any name, and any zip code. So 84135. Pay $99. And if it turns green, it redirects me to the thank you page because that's what I put in the success URL. And if I look at the URL here, I have my app. So localhost thanks, and then I have that session ID, and then it just has a session ID for the thing that I just purchased. So I don't need to use this for anything. And in fact, I really don't want to use this for anything because this isn't guaranteed to happen. Imagine after the user purchases something, they click the button, then they close their browser. The payment will still go through, but they'll never make it to the thank you page. So you don't want to depend on the user making it to the thank you page for you to know that the order has been confirmed. So later in this video, I'll show you how to handle that. So if we go over to the dashboard and look at payments, I see a $199 payment that has succeeded from testuser@gmail.com. But I also see 3 other payments that are incomplete. And the reason why these payments are incomplete is because these are created after the session is created. So once I create a session, it is waiting for a payment. And then once the user pays, then it will say that the payment is successful. But every time I refresh the page, so let me go home. Every time I refresh the page, and then I'll refresh the dashboard, it creates a new incomplete payment. And this is not what I want. So what I want to do, well, this could be what you want actually. If you have a process where you know the user is about to check out when they land on a certain page, and they'll only change their mind if they're backing out of the checkout process, then it's potentially okay to generate the session like this. But if you have a case where the user has to decide whether they want to purchase or not, then you probably don't want to generate the session in this way. So for this example, it's pretty bad because you only have to click one button and you can purchase. But if it were something like a shopping cart where you add a bunch of things to a shopping cart and then you say like checkout, and on that checkout page, you built a session on the back end, then it's not that big of a problem. But it's preference, but ideally you wouldn't want to have these incomplete payments in here unless the payment was truly incomplete. Like the user at first intended to pay, but then they changed their mind. So to handle this, what I need to do is I can create an Ajax version of this process. And what will happen is when the user clicks the buy now button, it will go to a route that will generate the session. And then from there, it will redirect to the checkout page. So the session only gets generated after the user clicks on a button, not before, like in this case. So let's go over to the code and we'll create an example using the API. So now let's create that endpoint that will be called through an Ajax call. So I'll call this checkout, takes in a request, and this is going to return JSON. So I have to import the response for that. So from Django.http import JSON response. Okay, so we're going to return some kind of JSON response here, and I'll fill this in later. And this is going to be from a post request. And, in Django by default, you have to have cross-site request forgery tokens anytime you have a post request. But in this particular case, I don't want to have it, so I'll make this exempt. So I'll import CSRF exempt, which is this. And if you want to have CSRF tokens on this, you can, but for the example purposes, I won't have them. So I'm just making it exempt here. And then what I'll do is I'll add a URL. So it's called checkout, and we'll say a path checkouts, and then views checkout, and the name will be checkout as well. Okay, now that we have checkout, what I can do is I can basically take the code from index, so all the Stripe stuff from index, and I'll move it down into the checkout. So the same code is being executed, it's just in a different place. And I want to return the session ID and the public key to the response. So basically I'll take this and I'll pass it to the JSON response, and I have to return this. And here I can get away with just passing the template again. And with this, I can go over to the template and modify this a bit. So now instead of the redirect to checkout being executed when the user clicks a button, I want a call to that checkout route to be executed. So what I can do is I can put a fetch, and I'm going to be fetching to checkout. So checkout, or just /checkout. And then after that, I'll get the result and I need to convert it to JSON. So return results to, no, it's just JSON. And then I'll have the data available. And in here, I'll have the redirect to checkout. So let me move this up, paste that in there, and then just format it a little bit better. And everything looks good. So now I have to modify some of the parts of the code. So remember that I'm passing the public key and the session ID through the response. So I won't have the public key here anymore. So I have to move this down. I need to put this inside of the then after the JSON is returned. And instead of Stripe public key like this, I can just use data.checkout or checkout data. What did I call it? Stripe public key. And then likewise, I can do the same thing for the session ID. So it's just session ID. And I'll need I don't need the quotes because this is JavaScript. So data session underscore ID. Okay, just like that. So now let's try this process. Let me make sure I didn't forget anything. And let's see if it works. So I'll open up the console, make sure I have no errors, refresh the page, no errors. And let's go to the dashboard. And I still have one above the completed one. So from the example, so I'll just refresh this a few times and then I'll go to the dashboard, refresh just to make sure I'm not getting any incomplete payments, and I haven't. So now let's try purchasing. So I'll click on the button. It redirects me to the page and I'll try it. So ajax@tests.com. And then we have 42s. And then I'll just put a date in the future. So 25. And Ajax tests. And then the zip code 12345. Okay, so we can pay. And then if it works, we should be redirected to the thank you page again. And this is taking a while to process. Okay, so that took a while, but we got redirected to the thank you page successfully, and we have the session ID in the URL. If we go back to Stripe and refresh, we should see Ajax test was successful, and we have the succeeded payment here. So it only creates a session when the user actually clicks the buy button. And if the user clicked the buy button and then on the checkout page, they decide that they don't want to put in their credit card information, then the payment will be incomplete. But that makes more sense because the user had the intent to pay at one point, unlike before where they were just loading the page. Now that we're able to complete a payment, what we want to do is we want to verify the payments now. So I want to make sure that when the user pays that they have actually paid, and I don't want to depend on them being redirected to the checkout page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a webhook. So a webhook is basically just an endpoint on your app that some external process will call automatically as a result of some event happening. So in this case, when the user makes a payment, it will send a request to our app saying that a user has made a payment, and we'll be able to see that in the code. So I'll go back to the Stripe documentation. Let me close this. I don't need it. And we see the confirmed payment is successful part, and they have like webhooks. They have other methods, but I'll use webhooks. So what I'll do is I'll bring in the code, and basically I'll copy everything and move it around as necessary. So I'm going to create a new endpoint, and we'll call this Stripe webhook. So Stripe webhook requests. And then I'll just paste all the Stripe code in here, and I'll remove the things that aren't necessary. So we have the Stripe API key. We don't need that again. But since we're using the Stripe stuff in two different functions, we have to move the API key initialization outside. So I'll just put this at the top of my file. Next, we don't need to import HTTP response. Well, actually we do, but it's going to be a blank response. So I'll just put this at the top of the file. And this actually can go with JSON response. Okay, so now if I go back down, it looks like everything else is okay. So I just need to make sure everything is indented properly. So I'll just move everything over. And looking at it, most of it should work right away. So let's see, we have this if, and then this handle checkout session function. This doesn't actually exist. So we'll just put our example code down here, and then I'll move that over. So expected indented block on line 38. And so I have the view defined twice. I'll remove this one. I'll move the CRSF token exempt above. And then the endpoint secret, I'll get momentarily because I have to create the webhook. But it looks like everything else is fine. I run it and it's not breaking anymore. So I have the Stripe CLI installed. So like I say, you have to go to the documentation to install it. I'll open up another terminal. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start up the process. So to do that, we have this listen here. So listen to a certain endpoint. And what I actually need to do is I need to create the URL for this. So path Stripe webhook, and then views Stripe webhook, name Stripe webhook. Okay, so here is the command that I have to run, and I just need to modify this to listen to or send the webhooks to our particular endpoint. So I'm adding the trailing slash. This will be localhost port 8000, and then I can copy this and run it. So once it's ready, it's going to give me a webhook secret. So I need to take this and put it into the view here where we have the endpoint secret. So typically you would create the webhooks on the dashboard. So here, but the thing is I can't create a webhook here that Stripe can talk to directly because I'm on my local machine. There's no way for Stripe to send a webhook directly to me. So that's why I have to use the Stripe CLI, because the Stripe CLI will basically be in the middle. So Stripe CLI is listening for webhook events, and then the events will be forwarded to my actual webhook in the app. So now that I have this, I will be able to see the webhook working. So let me see if there's anything I should print. Like when the webhook fires, I want to print webhook, right? So we'll see this on the terminal here. So I'll create a payment. Buy now, test webhook at gmail.com. And then this is 42s. And then test webhook. Okay, so we're going to pay. And we'll go back over, and we see webhook is being called several times. So there are different types of events. The event that we're concerned with is the checkout session complete, which I'll show you momentarily. But this just shows that the webhook is being called. It's being called, it looks like 5 times here. So there are 5 different events that get called, and then the user gets redirected to the thank you page. So just to go over what's happening here is when the webhook is called, it's going to get the request body, so the data that the webhook is sending, along with the signature. And then the signature is going to be used to kind of verify that the webhook is legitimate, because it is an open endpoint, so anybody can send a request to your webhook endpoint. But if they don't have the right signature, then it will fail when you go to construct the event using the Stripe API. So if this succeeds, if the event gets constructed, that means the webhook is legitimate and there's information. And if there are some issues, then it will just raise an error. So down here, this is where the event can be checked. So in this particular example, they have the checkout session completed, which is exactly what I want. And in here, they're getting the session. So the session is going to be related to the session that we create here. So this session is just a completed version of the same session that we first created. So I can do something like print session. And also in each session, we can get the line items. So the line items represent everything that the user paid for. So we won't see them on the session directly. We have to query for it. So what I can do is I can say line items equals stripe.checkout and then session. And we're going to, if I can spell session, we're going to list the line items. And to do this, we have to pass in the session ID. So it's going to be that session object above an ID. It's actually a dictionary. And then I can say limit 1 because I know there's only one product. And I'll just print out the line items. Right. So now let's go ahead and make another payment. And test, let's say test line items. So let's be test line items at gmail.com. And then 625, 455, test line items, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so we'll pay. And what we expect to see is when it succeeds, we want to see the session and the line items. So here we have the session. So let me just bring this up. We have the session, gives you information about it. And here, let's see, we have the description. So this is the line item. We have the Django product. We have the subtotal. And we have other information about the product itself. But, in our case, the most important things are the amounts and the description. We want to know what was actually purchased. So using this webhook, we can then do something in our system. So imagine, items needs to be shipped out. We can change a flag in the database saying that the order has been processed and it is waiting shipment or something like that. Or, you have a process where an email can get sent to the person saying like, hey, here's your ebook or whatever. Just depends on what you're selling. But you would do it here in the webhook instead of doing it at the thank you page. So you know that the user has actually purchased and they didn't just land on the thank you page and use like a fake session ID. So that's pretty much it for the basics of the Stripe checkout process. Of course, you can make it more complicated if you have a more complicated checkout system, but this is the essential knowledge that you need to know to at least get started on it if you want to use it in this way. If you want to extend on it, then it just depends on what your particular use case is. So if you have any questions about this, feel free to leave a comment down below. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please subscribe. So thank you for watching, and I will talk to you next time.